So, I want to come clean in a way in this video that will certainly not be for everyone, and maybe for nobody. These are sort of like bottles, message in a bottle, these YouTube videos. You cast them out into the ocean of the internet, and you don't know into whose hands they land, who finds the message. But maybe somebody that needs to hear it will hear it and will find it. And maybe it's just me that needs to hear it and speak it. Maybe that's the most, the most I could hope for. Yeah. But and it's a bizarre topic. It's a weird topic. I really have hesitated to share it, period, with anybody, period, let alone to put it out into the kind of wilderness of YouTube. But yeah, maybe it'll be useful to somebody. It's hard to say. And the topic is astral or etheric implants. Astral implants, or you could say objects, etheric objects, astral objects. And just even that, without saying anything else, there's already so much kind of that needs to be, it's a whole worldview and a whole paradigm that kind of needs to be unpacked, and there's a lot wrapped up just in that idea. So I'll try to give some context. Part of what's hard about talking about this is we live in sort of alternate realities in so many ways. We're sort of compartmentalized into different philosophical, spiritual realities. Most of it's implicit. It's not something that many people have really taken the time to deconstruct or think of in this kind of at this depth or in this kind of specificity. But there are these kind of meta narratives, meta ideologies, meta ideas, or conceptual frameworks that sort of are the underpinnings or the foundations from which an entire cosmology, you could say, or entire worldview springs. And one of those big paradigms is scientific materialism. And within that context, what I'm about to talk about makes no sense. Or the sense that it makes a kind of pathological sense. So that's one of the concerns in bringing it up is Yeah, just that we tend to see these things, and if we're coming from that worldview, and most of us are, especially, well, I don't really know percentages, but it's a really dominant way of looking at life in the modern world, in the U.S., Western Europe, and many places. The basic idea or premise, at least how I'm using it, is that matter is kind of the fundamental constituent, the fundamental component of reality, that what we have is the physical universe and nothing beyond. Everything reduces down to matter. Which puts it in the realm of empirical measurement, weights, measures, all of that. That there is such a thing as matter, solidity. And there's all kinds of implications of that, but one big one in terms of spirituality and in terms of insight and contemplative practice is just the idea. I mean, one of the big ideas is this notion that everything arises out of matter. So matter's fundamental, and that has the kind of consequence of when we think about things that are kind of, you could say, almost anomalous or ill-fitted to that paradigm, kind of more subtle phenomena. Primarily, I'm speaking about consciousness, spiritual experience, but consciousness is kind of the underlying thing. That paradigm, that worldview says that consciousness is a epiphenomena. Phenomena. I think phenomena is the word you hear, or a byproduct of matter, that somehow just the certain concatenation, the certain configuration of matter, of neurons, of our neurochemistry, of the neural network, but essentially of matter. What are all this? Got all these terms floating around. Dendrites? Is that right? Neural synapses. Anyways, somehow as a result of our nervous system, basically our brain, our neural networks, our brain cells, that consciousness arises out of that, like as in you get the certain combination just right, certain sophisticated ordering of matter just right, and it gives birth to this huge, unbounded, mysterious, infinitely vast, infinitely varied, infinitely creative field of consciousness within which everything, all of perception, all of experience unfolds. That's how I understand it. That's how I'm using it, at least. Let's just say it that way. That's kind of the scientific materialist paradigm. Everything breaks down to material, to matter, and that the more subtle phenomena that are kind of anomalous within the paradigm, even though they're not really understood in any kind of resolution with any kind of detail, that it's only a matter of time and more sophisticated measurement, more sophisticated methods and instruments will be able to explain all phenomena. It's reductive in that way. And it's very convenient for the model because it can just kind of dismiss out of hand a whole variety of human experience, and consciousness, of religious experience, of spiritual experience, and it falls apart on any kind of close analysis and matching the data up against experience. It's just a very low resolution. I did a whole nother video, so I don't really need to get into this, but I think I called it Spirit and Matter, something like that. And, but yeah, it's just a model with a lot of holes in it. I use the analogy of, at the time of the Copernican revolution, we had a geocentric universe, meaning the Earth was the center of the universe, and everything revolved in some way around it. The celestial spheres, all the heavenly objects revolved around the earth. And I believe it's true that they even had like physical models. Can't think of the right word. I guess maybe mechanical brass models of the geocentric universe with the earth and all the planets. I don't know if you cranked them, but it had it all worked out, because from our position on the earth, there is something very convincing about it. If you don't have that cosmic vision to relativize our place here on the earth, this feels like the firm ground, and everything is revolving around the earth. It's a very kind of intuitive, in a sense, and understandable way of looking at reality. So they built these models based on that. But I think one of the things that kind of broke it, one of the anomalies in the paradigm, was you have, just from Earth, you can observe retrograde motion of the planets. And it's actually just the planet following its orbit around the sun. You talk about Mercury in retrograde. It's only from the position of the Earth and the vantage point of the Earth that it looks like it's moving forward and backwards in the sky and then forward again. And that doesn't really make sense in a geocentric model, where things should just be kind of seamlessly, fluidly moving around the Earth. So they would observe these forward and backward movements, which is actually the planet circling around the sun, Mercury or whatever planet circling around the sun. But from Earth, you get that retrograde motion. Anyway, so it's those little anomalies that start to break apart the model, and that just never fit. The model was never quite right. But as soon as you switch that fundamental assumption of the Earth being the center to the sun being the center, and even that gets relativized because it's just within our solar system, obviously, and there's bigger planetary and galactic motions going on. But once you switch that model to a heliocentric universe, I believe that's the Copernican revolution, 15 or 1600s, I think, then all of a sudden, all those anomalous features that didn't make sense in that form or model just fall right into place. It's like there's this cosmic simplicity, and everything falls into place, and it all, fits, and it all makes sense. There's something analogous happening with our scientific materialist understanding, where there's certain ways intuitively that it kind of makes sense based on the observational data, but there's all this anomalous information that has to be excluded, or you have to create very convoluted theories of how it could be included. So it's lacking that kind of divine simplicity in the model, within the model of scientific materialism, or pathologized. And so once you kind of make that switch over to, the analogy would be moving from geocentric to heliocentric, moving from the scientific materialist paradigm into the, I'll say, God-centered, spirit-centered, there's different ways to refer to it. I think it would be referred to probably philosophically as idealism. There's a guy called Bernardo Kastrup that talks a lot about it. Rupert Spira, he speaks about it from a more poetic and kind of Eastern religious Advaita Vedanta standpoint. And that's definitely my direction. The words don't really matter, but it's a switch from matter as the fundamental to spirit as fundamental. Consciousness could be another name for that, and I've done video after video about how I see that consciousness is sort of the ground of being, and out of that it condenses, and here's a Rupert word, it modulates, it sort of crystallizes as it moves out of that pure, unbounded state of total freedom, absolute peace, into concretion, into form. The myriad, what does he say? Multiplicity and diversity of forms. But it's rather than material, rather than so-called matter. I mean, even not a very, that's sort of a low resolution word, matter, but within that paradigm, how it understands itself. You've got matter as fundamental, moving that towards consciousness as fundamental. So to get back to that issue of consciousness being a byproduct of the mind, it would be more accurate to say that the mind is a precipitation or a byproduct, if we want to use that language, that the mind is a byproduct of consciousness. It'd be more accurate. I wouldn't ever phrase it that way because it's more like the simplest way of saying it is that consciousness is. God is. That's all there is. And what we apparently see, apprehend with our senses, is just different sort of vibratory patterns or different different modulations of that primary, even to say substance isn't quite right, but just to put in something kind of conventional. Everything is just a modulation of consciousness, of the primary fundamental of God's being, God's infinite being. So, and once you switch to that, it doesn't exclude what's observationally true in the scientific materialist paradigm. All of that still fits, just like the heliocentric, geocentric switchover. It all still makes sense, but it gives it a different context, a much vaster context, a much simpler context, and it accounts for the variety of human experience. And it also aligns so well with what wisdom traditions, with what spiritual masters, teachers have been saying for millennia. That's another thing that bothers me about the whole scientific thing. And just now people like slowly kind of tiptoeing their way towards, is it panpsychism? Is it, all these kind of just slight, like trying to maintain the edifice of scientific materialism, but drifting invariably in the direction of God, of consciousness as fundamental. But it just, from a certain perspective, it strikes me as very arrogant, science, that scientific materialist perspective of like, we're just going to disregard millennia of deep insight, people that have, and with great, you could say, scientific rigor, or none of this is anti-science. It's all about truth. It's about what's actually true. Yeah, I'm kind of getting off in a direction I don't really want to get into, but I guess just what's relevant about it is that within the scientific materialist paradigm, you predictably have to sort of invalidate or pathologize certain dimensions of experience. This other paradigm all language is metaphor on some level, and this isn't a language game, and this isn't about concepts really, but the framework for it is much cleaner, much more supportive of the reality, the experience, and provides for a much clearer and more integrated understanding of spiritual experience and subtle experience. Allows for the possibility of subtler realms of creation, of subtler experience, which so many people across cultures, across millennia now, and as far back as we have records, basically, have been in touch with. So, all that is to say, this is going to sound just like either gobbledygook or pathology or mental illness. I guess that's what I mean by pathology, depending on your worldview. And and so this this video is really not for you if that's how you see the world. Um, and if you're not experiencing what I'm about to describe, it's not really for you either. You know, there's a danger in sharing on the other side of kind of creating paranoia and feeding into the mind's tendency to just amplify the most paranoid, most anxious thoughts. And this video isn't for you either. You don't have to be, it's not relevant to you. It's not part of your experience. Why would you, it's not, just not even something you need to pay attention to or listen to. But if you are experiencing this, and I know because I've been experiencing it for about 6 years, and I've done a lot of, it's been very difficult 6 years. And in some ways, I'm a man on fire trying to fix this, to heal this. And when you're desperate, it sort of focuses your attention. So I feel like I don't really have answers. I've got some suggestions, got some understanding that might be useful to somebody, and I've got a hell of a lot of experience, done tons of research, both data and reading, working with healers, talking with people, emailing, having in-person sessions, and my whole life, basically, all of my energy, all of my attention is in some way revolving around this issue. So I do have some experience here, unfortunately. Or fortunately, I guess. It just depends how you want to put it. But so we have multiple layers, you could say, of our body, of our being. This most dense level, which some traditions I've heard call the animal body or the meat body, or just this apparent physical body. And you could look at that as sort of the most superficial level, also the most dense, the most difficult for most of us. Storehouse of a lot of trauma and pain, but sort of nested within that or superimposed onto it, it starts to get a little bit complicated to visualize, and no image I'm going to give is quite perfect, and then we have all these sort of subtler bodies, and I don't have all of this worked out, so the only distinction I can really give with any confidence is that there's this physical body, and then there's subtler layers of experience, subtler, you could say, anatomy. And the specifics and the technicalities of it aren't really what the message is here. I'm trying to ground it in a little bit of, trying to lay it out a little bit conceptually and with some clarity and go into a little bit of detail. But it's not really that important, especially if you're dealing with it. None of this matters at all. It's not really an intellectual pursuit or curiosity or something to analyze or no, it's if you're experiencing what I'm describing and what I'll describe here in a moment, you're suffering. So none of this really matters, but a little bit of conceptual grounding I think is helpful. You've got these subtler layers of experience, and maybe you could think of them as, again, it's all just labels, so that doesn't really matter, but you could maybe think of this as an aura, what's depicted sometimes as the aura. I've also seen these images, and maybe part of what I'm talking about is also what people are talking about when they talk about the bioelectrical field. Maybe that's not the right, I think it's bioelectrical field, something like that, that we have this, that we generate this kind of electric field similar to the planet Earth, actually. It looks very similar. That coming out of both poles, there's this, can't think of the name of the shape. I think it's a torus. If you look up bioelectric field or magnetic field of the Earth, you'll see this shape. It looks kind of like the negative space coming between the two poles of the Earth, almost like this tube, this hollow space, and then just this kind of almost like a donut. Can't think of the actual name of the shape. Orbis? Anyways, you can Google that. But our bodies have something similar. So if you are really hard-boiled about this being put into a scientific paradigm, there is some crossover potentially. But I don't have it all really figured out because that's not really what's important to me. And it doesn't really matter how you want to look at it. It's just dimensions of experience. You know, people talk about the emotion body, the pain body, the shadow, subconscious, the unconscious, the light body, the energy body. And I've seen different systems that have it all very cleanly delineated and categorized. You know, dream body, but our consciousness, it does seem to be very multifaceted, and that this waking experience and the inhabiting of this body here, this is just one kind of sliver, one facet of reality. And our consciousness seems to be able to take on bodies in different realms and different forms. But even here in this waking reality, you can access these subtler dimensions, especially as you start to go through a spiritual awakening and there's a big energetic component. You'll really start to notice that there is a subtle energy body, and it's a felt sense, if I could put it in those terms. It's something you can very definitely feel, and it gets more expansive as you heal. You realize a lot of what you're doing on the healing path, on the spiritual path, is we've got all these densities in consciousness that are overlaid into and sort of interwoven or interpenetrating our physical body. So we feel it in the body, these energetic places. And they start to open up, and you do start to become aware of, you know, what traditionally looks like the chakra system, that you've got these energetic centers in the body, and it opens up in a felt sense. You can feel it intuitively. You can feel the energy in your body. You can even start to notice, you know, I've heard people call them nadis. For a while, I could really feel them at different points in my body. The roof of my mouth was one. But anyways, so you'll start to notice all this as you start to heal and clear out these energetic densities. That more capacity comes online, your consciousness opens up, and now these energetic bodies, these subtler bodies, are not immaterial. See, that whole paradigm breaks down of what do we mean by matter. It'd be more accurate to say everything is energy. Everything in the manifest world is energy, different densities of energy, densities of light. I like that term, but something along those lines rather than matter and subtle matter and energy. That whole thing breaks down. It's more like what we think of as matter, apprehendable to our senses, is more just like a very dense form, vibratory form, slowed down, dense form of light, of consciousness, of energy. And so that just puts it on this spectrum of pure, formless, unbound consciousness, awareness, and increasing density up to the physical form. So as you move into these subtler forms, you still have, and it seems to me, I don't have this perfectly mapped out, but my experience is that you have a subtle anatomy, meaning that there's subtle skin, subtle organs, and energetics. It's more fluid, but there's still a kind of physicality to it. You feel it. Now, as you open up, I talked about in another video, you start to open up into these other realms. And something that a lot of people, well, I don't know about a lot, I mean, we're talking about a pretty specific subset of the world's population here, but if you're having these experiences, it's not uncommon that you open up into realms that are not good, that are hell realms, that are operate under very different moral structures, ethical structures, or seemingly no, or inverted moral structures where to maximize pain, to cause harm, is the delight of beings in those realms. They feed off of our pain. And it sucks. It's brutal. It's awful. And I did a video on that, so I won't go into all of that, but there are ways that you learn to work with it and heal it. And I hope you're getting a sense of why I tried to be cautious and give a little bit of a cautionary disclaimer, because all of this can really make a paranoid mind even more paranoid. And on the path, you will have to kind of confront some of these things. Ultimately, you are bigger than all of that. Ultimately, one way of framing it is you could say God is trying to show you how strong you are, and you will gain the capacity to overcome, to dissolve, to vanquish all of these things. But that can sound a little bit glib when people move too quickly into putting that way, because mostly it's just a fucking brutal slog. And it all seems just like unnecessary suffering along the way. And I've often said, and something I really respect Craig Holliday for, something he says often is, I would not have designed it this way. He told me that, I mean, he says that to everybody, but he's told me that a number of times. I always found that really compassionate and helpful. It's like the acknowledgement of like, no, you don't have to look at this as everything is perfect and it's the divine design and, you know, it's all there for your benefit ultimately. It's like, no, fuck that, man. You're not going to brutalize me and give me this like fragile nervous system and little vulnerable human condition. And then not only do I get, you know, brutalized on the path, now I have to say, thank you so much, Lord. This is exactly what I needed. No, it's like you've got a human psychology. Suffering sucks. You don't have to pretend otherwise. And I definitely would not have designed it this way. I think it's a fucking terrible design. I think so many aspects of this are just wrong, you know? Now, you don't want to dwell on that either, because it's not going to help you. Reality is how it is. But So that's one possibility. And for whatever reason, karma or wounding, or I think it probably has to do with trauma and wounding, things like that. Some people are more exposed to some of these than others. Again, you can reframe it and say it's almost like God chooses some of us to go through really brutal things. Sometimes that's a helpful perspective. It's like God thinks I'm up for the task. That's why he's putting me through all these trials. That can be, sometimes that can be a helpful thing. It can go both ways, but so spiritual attack is one part of this crazy shit that we're in. And yeah, there are a lot of forces in creation. Not all of them are good. I guess you could say theologically that's the consequence or the cost or the risk of free will. The ability to choose love freely, but the ability to choose anything. This world of duality. Now, ultimately, are all of these things the play of consciousness? Is all of this just consciousness? Yes. Yes, it is, and that's not an insignificant insight. However, that's often, I've noticed, leveraged, weaponized to invalidate when people are having really difficult experiences. So hold that one lightly. Use it if it's helpful, but manifestation is part of the equation. Now, within this whole context, philosophically, spiritually, experientially, you can come to recognize and come to experience, come to have objects placed in your subtle physiology, your subtle anatomy. I don't really like the term astral implant, etheric implant, astral object. I'm only mentioning that because that's kind of the terminology that gets used. And if you're looking up information and trying to figure out more about it, those will probably be the terms that'll get you more information about it. I just don't like the word implant. It's understandable, but again, it really quickly can move a mind into paranoia. And what the mind is going to want to do is to figure this whole fucking thing out. It's going to want to know, how is this happening? How is this possible? Who is causing it? Where is this coming from? And so you're going to go down a rabbit hole and you're going to search on the internet and you're going to find the most frightening, most paranoid, most anxiety-laden descriptions from people whose minds have come undone. And you're going to find all that information out there. And it's just going to amplify a spiral for you, a paranoia spiral, anxiety spiral. And it's not going to be useful. Don't go down that route. You don't need to go down that route. It doesn't matter how it's happening. It doesn't matter how it's happening, why it's happening. And you'll find all kinds of theories, all kinds of information, and people and healers, and you're desperate and you're going through hell, and they suck because they're very physical, very real, very painful, depending on the clarity of your insight and how much you've kind of loosened up the kind of ambient density in your field. These things become more and more painful, more and more crystal clear, because it's like before you were living in this sort of blackout of just numbness. And as you've started to break into that, cracks of light are coming into your field, into the blackout of your body, mind, your whole being, into this frozen energetic block that you've been for most of your life here in this crazy world. As you start to heal that, and some of that starts to break apart, and some light starts to shine through, that usually, at least that was the experience for me, that is the point at which these objects became very obvious because they were sort of camouflaged in among the blackout. There was no contrast, but when the light starts to pour in and you've got these objects, and I'll give a description more about what I mean here in a second. They become just crystal clear and very painful, physically painful. Yes, there's a whole psychological anguish that goes along with this. It's enough to tip somebody into the edge of madness, absolutely. It doesn't have to at all. It does not have to. But I can see how it could happen because it just opens up a can of worms and your mind is just reeling, looking for answers. And so, I'm going to pause here because I think I might be running out of space. I'm also getting a little self-conscious about how much my voice is carrying right now. So let me pause here and clear up some space.